And what's happened through FERA funding is basically a devolution of that whole 300 million, 100% rather than 10% to local boards. So we've now said, right, local boards, you're responsible for running those services. A lot of them are through contracts that span the whole region, but the decision making is kind of now being devolved to local boards. And what's happened is that some of those costs, the cost of electricity, the cost of parks maintenance has gone up faster than inflation. And we've seen some boards who have got lots of assets and have benefited from, I guess, previous funding arrangements. Their costs are now going up. The funding formula is giving more money to the boards that don't have those assets. And so there's more money being created. So that 300 million has been increased by 50 million to 350 million. This would increase it by another 15 to 365 million. So it's just more and more money being added to that pot of money. So the FERA funding policy sort of has deliberately moved more money to the boards that have less assets to try to even things up. But it didn't anticipate these rising costs. The question is, how do we deal with that? And the long-term solution to that is looking at this policy. It's that last bit of the resolution. How do we, given the nature of those cost pressures, given the levers local boards have, how do we come up with a fair, equitable and sustainable model in the future for the LTP? But in the meantime, we have these challenges between more money for boards with lower assets, but rising costs for other ones, and how we work through that. So hopefully that gives a bit of context.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner, then Councillor Hills.
Thank you. So it's not considered prudent to borrow to cover a $50 million problem like this for a year, but it is prudent to borrow $100 million to cover the shortfall of our insurance that we haven't been paid out for 3 years. Is that right?
Well, so what we've done is, yes, we've paid out to fix assets that are broken on the basis that we'll get the insurance, within 6 to 12 months. It's taking longer than that, but it is only, maybe it's a couple of years, 2 or 3 years wait. But it's not about, we're confident we will get a reasonable chunk of that back, as opposed to this situation where there is no sort of payback other than clicking it through rates over a long period of time.
But if we get to identify the savings in due course, as Councillor Gibbons suggests, we could get the money back.
I mean, if we'd identified 15 million of savings that we could make within 12 months or so, and say we'll borrow to do that timing difference, that'd be a different situation. But those savings haven't been identified here.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hills.
Yeah, thank you. I guess first is on the borrowing for debt, because we went through this last term, borrowing for OPEX, we went through this last term pretty hard. Understanding around that we don't do it, but also will that not leave a $15 million hole in the next budget? Because you've only borrowed for the 1 year of that cost.
Yes, correct. We'd still need to solve what we do, the next year and the year after. That's correct.
And when you talk about the effects on our borrowing, you're talking about the ratings agencies saying that we're going against good financial policy, and then the rating agencies have an effect on what we can borrow for debt. So what sort of percentage interest, I know it's hard to talk about, but what sort of percentage interest could a change of making the rating agencies put us on notice for borrowing for OPEX?
I mean, it depends on what decisions they make, what it means for a credit rating. So the risk is that they would, based off this and other things that are happening, and there is they are looking very closely at rates capping and what does that mean for our ability to service debt. They might make a decision to reduce our credit rating, which makes it harder and more expensive to borrow debt. So it does. I can't recall the figures we've used. It depends on what assumptions you make at the point in time, but it does add interest cost. If a rating downgrade is triggered, and there's also harder to get access to debt, there might be covenants associated with conditions attached to that, all those kind of things. So we would want to avoid that if we can.
So would it be correct in saying that even a slight concern would mean, even say a 0.01% change to our borrowing costs would be $15 to $20 million? Like almost a rate increase, 1%. Our current borrowing.
Yeah, it could do. I mean, it's hard to forecast, but yes, it could do. It might be a little bit of a stretch to say, this resolution would specifically lead to that outcome, but yes, you could be talking about things in that order of magnitude.
So by borrowing for this, we could create a domino effect that costs us more than the money we're trying to find.
It's possible, yeah.
Thank you. The other question I have is the difference between the 6 and the 15. So, putting it out there, I've lobbied the Mayor and Ross and others for the last 2 years on this, and we obviously have covered the cost twice, and pre-election I was saying to the Mayor and Ross that I'm really concerned about this. But the difference between the 6 million, and I don't know if there's a question for Phil or Ross, the 6 million mentioned in the mayoral proposal and the 15 is 6 million would enable, and this is what we're going to try and do, that no board would have to reduce their, they wouldn't have cuts.
So I guess just to clarify the 15 million versus the 6 million. So the 15 million represents the higher cost pressures that are facing local boards, and that's the higher cost of gas and electricity, higher cost of park maintenance, cleaning, those kind of things. So that is the extra cost that local boards collectively have to face. At the same time, through fairer funding, more money has been provided. A total of 50 million has been provided to local boards. So some boards are getting extra fairer funding top-ups, and so the way the numbers fall, some boards both have a cost pressure and some extra funding. And that will, if the local boards use that extra top-up to cover the cost pressures, that will take care of 9 million out of that 15. And what that leaves is 6 million that relates to boards that have cost pressures but no top-up. And so those boards have been working through how do they deal with that, and they've been contemplating some drastic options, cutting service levels, reducing library hours. Some are looking at targeted rates. A lot of drastic options, and then the advice from the mayoral proposal is, no, we can manage it through some other means, work it through the budget, we don't have to go to that thing. But that's the 6 million is the hardest bit. It's those boards that have cost pressures but no top-ups. This recommendation would provide some more regional funding through whatever mechanism to not only take care of that 6 million, but also take care of those other boards so that they can use that top-up money, not to cover the cost pressures, but to fund other things that they want to do.
Okay, and then I don't know if this is for the mover, but so we have a $50 million cost pressure that we haven't found yet regionally, and so this would make it another, technically 65. Is that correct?
My understanding is I think the 6 million is factored in as part of that 50 million. So we've it's the overall group cost pressure all added together.
So I guess
a bit of overlap within the numbers.
I guess for Councillor Gillen, obviously I hadn't seen this until today, this amendment, but have you done the work on the saving component not affecting local, because every cut we have to make at this table then generally filters down to the rest of the organisation, including local boards.
So through the chair, or as I mentioned before, I haven't been able to get access to the drilled down departmental budgets to be able to have a look and see where this could come from. I've got some ideas, but look, this debate has been centering around the debt rather than what we actually should be discussing, which is the cost pressures. So with the acceptance of the seconder, I'm happy to remove the words to be sourced through debt or savings. Leave it at the consult, because remember this, we're just consulting here, we're not actually making a decision. So leave it at consulting on covering those cost pressures and see what the public comes back with, and then we can work out how to do it. But it's been a useful conversation because at least we've all been enlightened now that it is fully within our means to be able to use debt for OPEX. We just need to be aware of the consequences of that.
Okay, but just through the chair, the consultation document has to be prepared. What are you putting forward as the 9 million in savings?
Well, I'm not. I mean, let's hear from the public as to where they want to take it from then.
No, I mean, I can ask questions of the mover of an amendment.
Further questions, Councillor? Okay, on the speaking list, I have Councillor Ferry, Councillor Foley, and Councillor Newman. Councillor Ferry, questions?
Thank you. Some of my questions were around the savings, but you've taken that out now. So, I guess, is it possible for us to put something like this in without saying where we're going to find that money? Because you gave us before a pretty strong indication of what the options were, and one of those was rates. People who've been around this table for a while will probably not be surprised that I'm comfortable about finding this from rates, but I know that that is not a majority view. So should we be putting in a source for this?
I mean, to be honest, I'm a bit unclear how to write this in a consultation document. We're kind of asking the public for an option without telling them what the option might be. So we're kind of struggling a little bit to figure out what is the question we're asking. So we might need a bit more guidance from the committee on how you want us to ask the question here.
What would be the process by which we could give that guidance, and that might not be a question for Ross, sorry. Like, if we pass this with those words removed and without providing another source of funding, and the advice from staff is that provides them without the level of guidance that they need to word a question for the consultation. I don't know, Phil, sorry, it's a bit of a hospital pass. Just to put in a sports analogy there in case anyone missed, I was using a sports analogy. Yeah, no worries.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly happy that staff present you with options for how you would address another $15 million of cost pressure. The question for today, though, is how do you reflect that, as Ross said, in the consultation document?
Yeah.
And I think I'm referencing Ross's words earlier. You've got very few levers here: savings, a higher rate increase. Yeah, that's, I honestly think that's your challenge rather than mine at this stage. Well, all I can do is, if you give us the task, go away and tell you what the consequences are. We know what it is from a rating point of view. We'd have to do more work in terms of savings implications. If I'm on it, if I just make a more general point, given the direction of the discussion, and I know I'm repeating myself here, but we've got a very substantial existing savings target. We're probably about to add another $6 million to it. You want me to say that we can achieve that with no consequences for service levels, and I'm kind of at a point of scratching my head and saying we're pulling the rubber band pretty tight here. I'll always do my best by you in terms of how we work the problem, but I can't, in all honesty, sit here and tell you that we can definitely find it, and very particularly that I can find it without there being consequences for services and for boards. There's the dilemma.
So, thank you. So, just to clarify, we have a $106 million savings target already proposed, is that correct? And so this would potentially mean a $121.2 million savings target. Is that, yeah? And do we know where that 106 million is coming from?
No.
You can call me a lot of things, but Jesus ain't one.
Yeah, it's not coming under the tree from Santa.
No, certainly not entirely. No, it's a challenge we work on an ongoing basis, and again, not trying to get myself in the middle of the debate here, but I can anticipate where some of it might come from. Certainly not all of it at this stage, and I've always agreed with you this savings target regime on the basis that at the end of the day, if we're struggling to meet it, that I'll need to slow down the spend rate in the organisation so that we finish the year in an okay financial state, which is clearly normal business practice in any other context.
So what's our target for this year that we're partway through? Do you want to turn your mic on and say that? Someone?
the savings target for this year is 86, and next year it is, 106. So it's another 20 million on top of this year's savings.
Okay. So, okay. Sorry, I want to try and keep to questions rather than getting into debate about the amendment. The other question I had was around the source of these cost pressures, primarily being around power and gas. I know that's not the only thing, but the power and gas issue, and that often accrues a lot. And one of the patterns we're seeing with this is aquatic, which have higher power and gas costs than most other facilities. Given that there's a conversation underway about whether aquatic actually comes in as a regional or multi-board service in some way, is now the time to sort of be, I guess, coming up with a cover for this, or is it something we should look at more consistently? What is there any? What about the timing for this?
So we had a look at that and whether moving that to region would help with this problem. It doesn't really help. The cost pressures still bubble up one way or another. It doesn't solve the immediate problem. So I think, we think the better way to look at that is through, it's part of the LTP, it's part of that last bit around looking at a fair, equitable, affordable model, thinking about, how, should some budget some things like electricity contracts be considered on a regional basis? Should we look at multi-board funding? All those things are best considered next year as part of a wider look at the policy, and those things may help in the future. It doesn't really help with the immediate problem right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Foley.
Oh, kia ora, Chair. My question's a little bit different now that the conversation has progressed. I was going to ask, based on just some of your comments that you've made, Ross, around the 300 million now being given to local boards. So local boards have been given more funding. But is it not true, though, that under the fairer funding model, local boards that have assets they probably got from, like, for example, in my ward from the Manukau City Council, are disadvantaged then by the fairer funding model, even though you say more money has gone to boards?
So what the model does is it directs more money, and the additional top up of the money, the 50 million, it directs that money to the boards that don't have assets to try to even things up. The problem it's creating is the boards that have assets are the ones that have high problems with electricity and gas and have these cost pressures. So that is the challenge, the nature of it. It's not to say that it's one model's right or wrong. A model that's based off giving funding based off assets covers the costs that are there, but a model that gives funding to the boards with no assets is fairer in terms of evening up some of the historic inequities. Those are the challenges. I just would note on, it's just been brought to my attention that the way that this resolution is worded, it talks about giving local boards 15 million more in accordance with the fairer funding model, and the effect of that would be to, if we use the model, that would give that 15 million to the boards without assets. So it doesn't help the boards with the cost pressures. It actually aggravates the problem. It's just the way that it's technically worded. So we might want to move that using the fairer funding model, because it's the fairer funding model that is driving, putting the cost to the boards without the assets.
Yeah, kia ora.
Sorry, can I just clarify then? So if we remove the words in accordance with the fairer funding model, it would be distributed to offset the cost pressures that we've currently identified, correct?
That's right,
Okay,
yes.
then I'm happy for
The
those
two
words
things
to be
together don't kind of work, which is...
Then I'm happy for those to be taken out. The last thing I'd want to do is for that money to then go through the formula again, and yeah. Okay.
Sorry, it's complex, and that is exactly the problem that we're grappling with in the first place.
Just
Okay, well, that was helpful.
last
Yeah.
question, sorry. So if we don't do this and if we don't cover, we're only going out for consultation on it. We're not making a decision on it. But to be clear, that 15.2 million would still need to be found, but that would be put on the local boards to find through savings or targeted rates or whatever. So
this, if if this wasn't passed, if we didn't find 15 million extra funding, what it would mean is that we have to work through the budget process to find other solutions for the 6 million, but for the 9 million, with the boards that have cost pressures and have top-up, then they would be using that 9 million top-up to cover their cost pressures. The effect of finding an extra 15 means that those local boards don't have to use the new money to deal with cost pressures. They can spend that money on something else.
Kia ora. Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Newman followed by Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, look, thank you. It's another question to the chair in second. Sorry to be a complete pain in the arse here, but my concern was the inclusion of through debt, but that's been taken out. But now all of it's been taken out, and because savings has been deleted, it opens up. I interpret it as it opens up the door to through a rate increase. So what I'm interested in is the option of the funding to be funded through savings, and if I'm happy to consult on that. I don't know if that's an option that the mover and second are prepared to consider, but for me the inclusion of through debt was a complete no, and I'm not keen on another rate increase for these costs at this point. I'm interested in savings. I happen to agree that the Chief Executive does need to provide confronting savings options. I'm receiving rude messages from ferry users across the harbour, given some comments from me in recent times, which I'm comfortable with. But, I do think there is a needs for some quite confronting advice on savings. So whether the mover and second are prepared to just maybe make a tweak to clarify that it would be sourced through savings or not, but that would be my feedback. If they want to make if they want to comment, fine. If not, that's okay.
Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks. Just before I begin, I've got a few comments. So we're still in questions, and then we'll come back to thank you. I'll just ask my one question. I suppose it's sort of trying to figure out, it's following on from Councillor Ferry, do we have a duty to the public to actually explain where the revenue source is going to come from? Because otherwise we're creating a $15 million rod for our own back, aren't we? Are we required? Because we've got to balance the budget. Are we required to tell people if it's going to be rates, debt savings or whatever?
I think, as we said earlier, this is about how we consult with the community. The clearer we can be on what we're asking, the better the consultation will be. I guess we're kind of struggling a little bit with, we're asking the community about an option. We're not quite clear what that is. Is it rates? Is it savings or whatever? We will, if you pass this resolution, we'll do our best to write up what we think this is, and in February you'll get to see the wording around it.
Okay, I appreciate that and reserve my right to speak. Thanks, Chair.
I think that brings us to the end of the question, so we'll go into the to discussion debate now. John, you'll be aware that you've already spoken, so you won't be able to speak again, but open up for the debate and comment. Councillor, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, my skirt just got caught in my chair. Thank you. Look, I feel a bit sensitive about this topic because I think your intent is really honourable, right? I think we should absolutely look at this issue in the LTP. But this is an annual plan, and I know it's going out for consultation, but for me to support this, I'd have to be confident that it would work. And let me tell you about my concerns. It's against our financial policy. We currently have an $86 million savings target, which I know intimately well for this year, for current year. In this year, it goes up to 106 million. Now, when we make savings, and we do, some of them are one-offs and some of them are permanent. You're forcing us to increase the permanent by $15.2 million a year. And I cannot guarantee that, and nor can the staff. We will try our best to meet the savings target, but as I said, it's a combination of both. And that's a serious amount of money to bank in year on year on year. As I say, very happy to look at it as part of the LTP. Very happy to look at it as part of the LTP. But you're not just adding to the 106 million, you're actually adding to the confirmed, permanent, ongoing savings target. And that's going to be hard for all of us. So whilst I support your intent, and I do want to look at this, and you say quite openly, John, that you will want, there's information that you haven't got, I think we need to spend a year to have a look at gathering that information so you're confident around that. And I think we should look at this again as part of the LTP because it is permanent. And I would urge you, please, for a little bit of caution around here, because I would like to think that, like me, you want to get the right outcome. You've just got to make sure that we are able to deliver. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Shane.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in alignment with the Deputy Mayor. Usually we see things very differently in fiscal policy, but I think this is something where we need to be a bit sensible, to be honest. And I respect where the councillor is coming from. I do. I have concerns around this, and one of my boards are heavily affected by this. The issue for local boards that are affected is multi-board services. Boards that were fortunate or unfortunate to host the previous seat of the Legacy Council, so that's where the pool went, so that's where the major parks went, so that's where the libraries went, etc., etc. And in line with the Deputy Mayor's view, which I share, I wonder whether there's a way we can work on this internally behind closed doors, looking at shifting governance of things from local into regional where it makes sense, where it's a multi-board thing. This isn't sexy. This isn't going to make headlines, but it may solve the problem. It just requires some work. Going through, I think we need to be straight with the public on where the money's coming from if we're going to propose increasing spend, and let's take it in turn. Can't do debt. You can't fund operational expenses through debt. I don't want my children to be paying for this in the interest that it will accrue over the generations. It will be the equivalent of borrowing to pay for your mortgage. It's just not sensible. It's just not why we have debt. We have debt to fairly spread the cost of assets across generations. That is why we use it. Savings targets, according to many local boards that I've been reading the feedback of, already too high. All 3 Western local boards submitted they were worried that the existing target couldn't be met without reducing services. So to then say, oh, we'll just throw in another 15 mil, I don't think that's responsible. And we've been given the advice that agrees with that view, I believe. It would be like throwing more petrol on the fire. I'd also direct my colleagues to the staff advice, point 13 on the savings targets, which already show the struggle that we've asked Phil to try and achieve. And of course I back our organisation to do that, but I'm not saying there's a lot of savings sitting around that is obvious, it's waiting to be made. So then you get to a rates increase, and I mean this board's not going to vote, we're not going to vote for that. We have councillors over previous budgets that have never voted for rates increases, no matter what they are, right? So putting more rates is not going to work. So this amendment, unfortunately, and with respect, has created a different problem. It creates a $15 million problem for us to solve when we finally get to voting on it, and none of these options are going to work. So in a sense, I think we need to be straight with the public. I'm up for the conversation on rates increases, but most people aren't. So, I've got to vote this down, and I respect where the council is coming from, but I can't support it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Your Worship.
Okay, thanks for that. I haven't spoken up until now, but I can't support this in any way. I started off the fairer funding thing having listened to the accumulation of 12 years of predecessors not dealing with the fact that it wasn't set up fairly. It wasn't the fairer funding. It now means that the basis of which you get funding for your area is the population, which strikes me as fairly sensible. And with a small adjustment for the land and a small adjustment for the general welfare or well-offness of the various areas. It was set up to be fairer funding. It wasn't set up to be the free cost of any pressure funding. It wasn't set up to be free of any cost pressure. The council itself has cost pressure all day long, and you have to put some cost pressure onto the local boards as well. I remind you that we're in the middle of a debate where the government are considering dumping a rates cap on us, just on the basis solely of them looking like they're doing something really rather than anything else. It's not a good time for us to be suddenly throwing more money at the local boards. We actually heard that stuff and we added $30 million that we didn't have to, $50 million we didn't have to offer in addition to that. So if this goes ahead, I'm going to move that we reverse the $50 million and look like we're really serious. There will be no incentive for any board to make any savings if we're going to fully fund their cost pressures. We're not going to ask the ratepayers to fully fund the cost pressures on the whole council. That would look dreadful. And so this sends the very worst possible measure of incompetence and free money for everybody that we could possibly dream up at a time when the government are staring at us and trying to say, oh, councils are bloody useless, whereas with the government we're wonderful, which is in fact not the case either. But so just don't even think about this. My suggestion here, I've heard this, is that if we can find $6 million to help, we will. We will. But at the moment, the whole pressure on looking at those boards is so that they do look at their assets. And every one of them I've visited has unutilised land all over the place. And so I want them to look at those things. I'm not suggesting you go start chopping up perfectly good parks and bits and pieces, but so far I've found massive areas that have been underutilised. There's parks that have got 3 sheep on them. And so just you've got to have pressure at all levels. It's not just up to us to save the money. There's 180 of the bloody blokes who are on local boards. They've got to do something as well for their money. Find some money, save up. So I oppose this utterly, and I just hope that you're all rational enough not to be sucked into this sort of nonsense. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Patterson-Hamblin.
Kia ora. Excuse me. Like Councillor Gillan and actually all of the new councillors, I've sat around local board tables where we've had cost pressures come up that have been to do with decisions and procurement that local boards never had any involvement with, and that's why I do have sympathy for this amendment and why I considered supporting it really seriously. There's, it's been a really tough year or so in terms of having these financial goalposts shift a lot for local boards that have already gone through year after year after year of finding cuts everywhere. But I do represent FO, and that's an area that has been underserved for decades and decades, and fairer funding is the light at the end of the tunnel for that entrenched inequality. And I believe very strongly in fairer funding regionally. I think that the pace of it has created these struggles, and it's where this amendment has come from, and it's why I have sympathy with it. And I'm glad we're funding or seeking to fund the $6 million to go some way towards addressing the pace and the challenges that those paces have had. But any movement away from the fairer funding model, I just can't support, because I believe very strongly in it. I think it's a true regional look at how we fund things. It addresses a lot of those inequities that have been entrenched for a really long time. And so that's where I'm sitting with this. I think it's good that we've had the conversation. It's good that the 5 of us as well can bring that sort of very, very fresh experience of being on the local board and having those really difficult conversations. But ultimately, the extent to which this now moves away from fairer funding, I can't support. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Just in terms of speaking order, we'll have Councillor Turner, Councillor Fuller, and then Councillor Burns. So, Councillor Turner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm really looking forward to supporting anything that forces back onto us here a demand to look at our operation, to look at simplification, and to make savings which we are not looking at this point in time. There's a situation right now happening in West Auckland, a job there which is going wrong. 2 years ago, I sat in a meeting here, Mr. Chief Executive, you were in that meeting, about this project. There has been multiple project meetings and deliberations in the meantime, and then the project gets underway and it's a total muck-up. And so I reach out just yesterday, got an email, and I find that Mr. Mace Ward looked into it, and he spoke to the assigned project manager, who spoke to the appointed contractor, who advised that the assigned arborist had told them to do it all differently and chuck the plan out the window, because the tree roots had now, this fibrous roots had now crawled into the field that was being shifted. My point is, why didn't we just send the arborist there 2 years ago and get the bloody job done and save a gobload of money? And this is happening on a daily basis. I see it, the public see it, and that's coming out of a full facilities budget of 2.235 billion over the next 10 years, of which we're going to give the local boards some decision making over, so we say. There's a circuit breaker in this place between us, that building at 135, and reality. And this is what we're not reaching down and grabbing hold of. And I really hope that in the wording of the consultation, we'll put back the words, pay the same, get more. That's where the savings are. I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Foley.
Kia ora. Thanks, Chair. I want to refocus us all back and remember that this is about going out to consultation, right? This is about taking this out to the public, and let's hear what the public say and let's get some feedback from them. We know that the detail and the materials and what that's going to look like, that will come back to us at a later date, as it always does as part of the process. So I support the way that it's worded now. I support and I commend one of our new councillors, Councillor Gillen, for his courage in putting something like this up for us to talk about today. I think in my heart of hearts, we do not fund our local boards sufficiently to do the job that we ask them to do. And we're putting more and more pressure on them to do more and more, but we're not funding them accordingly. And that's why we've got this issue. I don't agree that the FERA funding model is correct, and I think that's been acknowledged by Tamsin and the Mayor's office. I look forward to looking at that in the long-term plan and adjusting the model so that it actually is fairer, because some of the local boards, and I mean the 6 local boards we're talking about, under the 6 million that are still facing huge shortfalls. Devonport Takapuna, 600,000. Henderson Massey, 600,000. Mangere Otahu, 1 million. Otara Papatoetoe, 1.1 million. Papakura, 800,000. Upper Harbour, 700,000. Waitemata, 1 million. These are huge numbers for local boards. Not huge in the relative scheme of us as an Auckland Council, if we're honest, but huge for our local boards, to whom we give such a small slice of a budget, and to whom we expect such a big return for what we give. I don't think it's free money. Of course, it's not free money. This is ratepayer dollars. It's money that we earn in other ways as well. But it's giving money to our local boards to do the things that we want them to do, to deliver for our communities on the ground where they best serve our people, our residents, the residents of Auckland. I'm going to support this. Obviously, I'm the seconder, but I'm going to support it for all of those reasons. In the scheme of things, 15.2 million is not a lot. Whether we do it through savings or debt or rates, I think the only reason we've taken that out is because of the discussion around the table. And you know, I really think for our new members as well, it's been an eye-opening debate, because on one hand, people started saying it was terrible that we had debts and savings up there. So then when it was taken out, then it was terrible that we don't have anything up there to tell us how we're going to fund it. So that gives you a bit of a taste of what it's like around this table. Welcome. Yes, but yeah, I mean, how the detail of it, that will come back to us in the materials, and I do hope that we will support this amendment. I understand if you don't, but to me, basically, we don't fund our local boards appropriately. We should do better to fund them better so that they deliver better for our communities. Kia ora. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Burns.
firstly, how local boards worked incredibly hard at their cost savings and asset recycling. And I'd like it known, that after 6 years, some of their ideas and concepts that have been brought to the table are actually held up from council process. So I just want to acknowledge that the Hout Local Board has worked really hard on looking for savings. Thank you to John, Councillor Gillen, for bringing the amendment to the table. I'm actually very happy that the general feel around the room is our local boards need more support, which I don't think anybody around here is denying. Word of the morning is from Ross, which was complex. This debate and conversation, the questions have been really useful, Lotu, for myself and probably the other new members. And that's what it's all about, and hearing some different perspective. I did want to support John on this, but now after hearing the really great questions and responses, I'm now not comfortable with the amendment. For the following reasons, going from 86 million to 106 million and then adding the other 6 million or so, and then figuring out it won't just be that, it'll be more. I don't believe it's achievable. You'll know I go on about setting targets, but must be achievable. And I think it's good as a team around council that we need to set visionary targets that we can actually achieve that aren't just made up. I think yourself, John, you identified that we don't even know what those budget options even are. I'm now part of the Value for Money with Victoria and the Deputy Mayor, and that's a big challenge itself ahead. And other people, so we have to look at those budgets and cost savings in itself. We can't consult with the community without being clear, on what that is, because I think what Ross said, it's leaving it too open-ended. So I guess for me at the end, it's the comment that I liked the most was legally yes, but financially not advisable. And in the annual plan, really, it's not achievable. So that keep coming back to that. I do want further discussions in the LTP, but I do not support the Fairer Funding Program as it is myself. But unfortunately, I won't be supporting the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, we'll have two more speakers, Hills and Ferries. So, Councillor Hills.
Kia ora, Chair. And I just want to go back a bit to, the pressures that have been on local boards, but also the solutions that we've found. So in the first year of last term, there was a $16 million cut up for local boards as part of the $365 million we had to find. And I and others pushed back pretty hard on the Mayor and others, but we put up solutions that were, can we ask the public if we can increase rates? And the public actually said yes. And we reduced those cuts considerably, but we did have to make hard calls. I think 500 staff unfortunately lost their jobs. There was a whole lot of massive changes to how council was working, and what Phil Wilson and others had to do during that time was pretty rough. But we had to make the decision, we had to make the call, and we had to give direction. I think this amendment has now changed a number of times, and I don't know if it 100% makes sense, but what our Chief Financial Officer has said, that it doesn't lend itself to direction. A question needs to be clear for the public on what the outcome's going to be. The seconder, Councillor Foley, just said it might be rates, it might be debt. Well, that doesn't say that up there. I was clear through my questions on the concerns of debt. If we fiddle with debt, funding OPEX through debt, and potentially put pressure on our debt rating agencies, it could mean far more money than this here. The impacts on our borrowing, when we're borrowing a lot more, and also look at the City of Rail Link, there's a big chunk of borrowing coming on. The other thing is that through the workshops, I asked, but I know many others did. I don't know what's going on. Are we changing the amendment again? Is that what's happening up there? Because it's getting more and more confusing. What's back in again? Savings. Okay, anyway.
Point of order, I'm sorry, but this is under debate. You can't change the wording further.
We've already spoken on the previous version.
I'll keep... talking, but yeah, you have to get the vote of the room to withdraw the current amendment. But anyway, I'll just keep talking to it. What I've advocated for in the workshops and before the election and during the time between the election and the swearing in, should I stop talking because there's a lot going on? I can start singing. So what I advocated for to the chair, to the mayor, to Ross and his team, went down to level 15, spoke to them, was to address urgently the funding issues for the boards that we're going to have to cut back on things to address. What I believe the mayoral proposal does is actually address that, and it will be hard, but I'm assuming or hoping in the next 7 months there will be a clear ability for those boards not to have to find cuts. So that's what the 6 million represents. That is what I thought we advocated through those workshops. I hadn't seen this amendment until this meeting. And to be honest, we cannot go out there with another 9 million and not tell anyone how or what is going to be found to do it. Because as we found during the emergency budget, or whatever we called it last term, was a lot of those regional cuts then did affect local boards. And they came back on us and said, hey, don't do that. So I am very concerned, and we advocated last time, we got the budget filled in, the 15 million last year, and the additional funding. Because you've got to remember, this FARA funding was actually proposed to be funded through reallocation, and which I was vehemently opposed to. And to the mayor's credit and others, they turned it around and we funded it through rates. Obviously, there's cost pressures because power, interest, everything else is going up. You know, it was great the last 2 years, but this is a step forward, and I hope that we can figure out over the next 6 months how to reduce the pressure even more. But putting this up, putting a question in that doesn't lead the public into any kind of outcome, and it might end up being that we give a false sense of what that is, because this doesn't lead to anything. We have to be responsible around this table about where money is going to come from and point to it. We can't put Phil up to another, just go find it, because that will mean significant changes to local boards, regional, the public, without knowing what that is. Because as we've heard over many years, that if we don't point to it, the staff are forced to find it without our permission, essentially, to meet audit. So thanks. I won't be supporting this, although I will be continuing to work with staff, much like Julie Ferry last week, on potentially regional approach to pools and leisure, whatever else we can do to help our local boards, but we need to work together to do that in a cohesive way. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Councillor. And just for clarification, I'm very happy that people kind of called me to account as chair around that changing of the wording. The mover came over and actually indicated to me the staff had struck out some words that he didn't want struck out, and the staff had confirmed that they made an error there, so I was just correcting that error. And it was to add in the word to be sourced through savings. Right. There was a mistake there, Shane. So, Councillor Ferry.
Kia ora. In terms of the FARA funding model, one of the first things that the Joint Governance Working Party found when we started working on this last term was that all local boards were underfunded. Some, however, were more underfunded than others, and there was an long-term equity issue about the fact that that underfunding would continue under the previous funding model because it was based on assets. And in the first term of Auckland Council, when I was on the Poketapapa local board, one of the most underfunded at that time local boards, we worked out that that was because we didn't have a lot of the assets from legacy councils that other local boards did. So shifting to something that was more agnostic about assets was a big step forward for a lot of boards. Often boards who neighboured other boards who had got those assets because as Councillor Henderson pointed out, they might have been the seat of the legacy council where they had their council chamber or where the major town centre was, that kind of thing. But what we also thought in the first term would happen was that over time, a lot of those asset inequities would be addressed because there would be investments in things like the library network, the pools network, community centres, community leases, the physical assets which would address the equity issue and therefore would also address the funding issue. What we all know around this table, because many of us have been around this or other tables within council for 15 years, others who've been around it more recently have all come from local boards. We all know that those network investments in facilities have not kept pace. And so it was necessary to come up with a different model for funding that was, as I say, more agnostic about assets as the way that we calculated a lot of the funding. So when we looked at it last term, we determined that the pie wasn't big enough, but we would come up with a fairer way of cutting the pie. We remain in a situation where the pie is not big enough. The slices are fairly distributed based on the formula developed last term, but those slices for each local board are not big enough because the pie is not big enough. If we were to go ahead with something like this and putting aside for a moment where the funding comes from, it would actually break the relativities. It would actually mean, because it's focused on the cost pressures, that it isn't keeping those pie pieces the same. It's making the pie bigger for some local boards and not for others. And as a result, I think that sets a really bad precedent for how we would move forward on local board funding. The other thing is the point was raised that there was a concern that it wasn't okay when it said to be sourced through debt or savings, and there were arguments about why debt or savings were a bad idea. And then when it was taken out, people were still against it. Well, that's because we have a responsibility here to put forward options to the community that are practical, that are balanced, that add up, and to put forward something that doesn't say, people can say, well, I don't like this lever or I don't like that lever, but to put up one that has no lever, I think is irresponsible. I want to make the pie bigger. This doesn't achieve that in line with equity, and it actually makes it harder, I think, to do that, and it's silent on how we would actually practically make that pie bigger. So I will not be supporting the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Winiata.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Going back a couple of years when it was mentioned that there would be cost cutting for local boards and that rubbish bins would be removed. It wasn't mentioned at the time when this proposal was put forward that that would be in perpetuity. So there would be a $70,000 cost to local boards that did want to accept didn't want to accept the bins being removed. We thought it was okay. Well, it's a one-off $70,000, but that it was in fact going to cost the Manarewa local board $70,000 a year in perpetuity. So I'm wondering, just trying to remember back through when the cost pressures came up, was this supposed to be a one-off cost because of the utilities cost increase, or is this something that is designed to be in perpetuity? Because if it was just going to be a one-off cost, which we were facing, then I don't understand why it's being put forward to the long-term plan, unless these cost pressures are going to be ongoing. When we were presented with the budget, initially we were working off what was being advised, and then the breaks were applied, saying that there was an amount that hadn't been budgeted for, which was essentially why the cost pressures came up last year. But due to the timing, it wasn't fair to put forward to the boards to find those service savings. And then with respect to the amendment, my perception of this is that the council is just asking for a way in which to find these cost savings for the next financial year. The Mayor advised us not long after we made our presentations or our maiden speeches that if we did want to have something or fit something within the budget, we wouldn't be getting an increase. We'd have to find the money for it, and I believe that all the council is trying to do is to find the money for this cost pressure as the one-off for what's affecting the local boards over the next financial year. But I will be following up afterwards to see if it is designed to be in perpetuity, because that would be quite concerning if that was the case. Thank you.
Okay. Hang on, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Short.
Thank you. I'm going to keep this short and sweet. But thanks, John. Yeah, let's lighten the room up a little. Thanks, John, for putting this forward. I think you've opened up a can of worms. And it is a discussion that needs to be had, but I do believe it's in the wrong place. And I think this is an LTP discussion and we need to have that there. I do want to echo what Deputy Mayor Simpson has said, and I don't believe we should be going against policy and opening up the floodgates, setting precedent. I just don't think it's being financially, I can't even think of the word right now, but we're not being sensible. Thank you, I do. I'm also really deeply concerned that supporting this will be increasing the more permanent decisions we'll be making long term, and that's not a fun exercise to carry out, as Deputy Mayor Simpson will know. So, like I said, keeping it short and sweet, I really don't think this is something I can support, but I also think this is something that local boards have had to do in the past as well, where they've had to look for savings. I vividly remember back during Rona, where we had to go through this exercise, and we did make these savings and we did have to slash some of our services, but it is an exercise that can be done. So with that, sorry, can't support this, but look forward to hopefully having this discussion during LTP.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newman.
I think I might be sort of tall and sour. So for me on this one, I mean, I'm trying to work, the wording's changed quite a bit. So where I fall, I'm totally opposed to the debt facility for OPEX. The exclusion of everything, to me, I interpret as all options open, including a rate increase, which I'm totally opposed to. I'm personally the Deputy Mayor and I will be disagreeing on this. I'm personally quite comfortable to receive confronting advice from the Chief Executive around the savings options and the consequences of that. Because I actually think I would like to have that conversation, and for people around this table and the public to see some quite confronting savings that would need to be reached. Because to my way of thinking, we've tended to over-rely on savings outcomes that people don't feel, and I think it's quite important actually to receive at least some advice as to savings options that you will feel and you won't like, because that's when you do have those very confronting moments. So, if it is only sourced through savings, and those savings haven't yet been described, I think that some advice needs to come back rather urgently from the Chief Executive as to what those savings would mean. I'm more comfortable with that. So, John, I probably will actually vote for, as I interpret the updated wording, although I still think you're going to lose it, to be honest, but if it is only through savings, I hope that the Chief Executive has that information available shortly. If the amendment does fail, I still think that information does need to come back, because I can assure you that there won't be sustainable savings identified through the consultation, because I haven't yet, as I said, I'm receiving the rudest messages about my remarks about ferries, so thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor. And online we have Councillor Fletcher, who may be the last to debate. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'll also keep it short and sweet. As I foreshadowed in the discussion earlier today with questions, I am concerned about the plight on ratepayers, and so I think it would be inconsistent if I were to support this without being clear on the funding mechanism. But I do want to acknowledge Councillor Foley and Councillor Gillen for really attempting to grapple with an issue that has been outstanding. So I'll be supporting further consideration of this through the LTP, but I can't support it at the moment. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor. There are no further comments or debate, so I will just put that on voices.
Division?
Division's been called. So just for those on, those members of the public, division is where we go around and make the votes individually, so they're recorded against each councillor. That we actually use an electronic system, so you will see that briefly on the screen of how people vote. If you need to delve in further, you'll have to look into the minutes once they're published. I'll hand it over to those of you in Resolve just to use that system. If you're having trouble with that, can you please indicate your vote to Sandra at the front?
Thank you, members. You're voting on the amendment on screen, and we'll begin the vote now.
So has the mayor voted? I've voted. Yeah, there we go.
That is last 5 votes to 16.
All right, thank you, councillors. Now, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we've still got the annual plan to go through. Now, we've done the questions on that. We could just debate that and put that to the vote. My feeling is we probably will continue and have a lunch break after the vote. So I open up for the debate on the substantial item on the annual plan. Are there any comments, please? There aren't any?
No, no.
Oh,
So this is debate on the mayor's proposal.
Yep, John.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a couple of things to say. Yeah. Right, Councillor Sayers, okay, yep. So that was quite an appropriate lead-in, and as some of the councillors mentioned, these sorts of annual plan decisions and rate increases don't come to us in isolation, and none more so than this year. We've had quite a build-up of cost of living pressures that have been well publicised in the media. We've got a government who's got a proposal out to cap rates 2 to 4%, and I think that's currently being consulted upon. As a council, we've had a series of rate increases now over the last 3 years: 7.75, 6.8, 5.8, and I'll say a little bit more about that 5.8 in a minute, because it was only a couple of months ago. This time round, it's 7.9%. With inflation running, roughly around the 3% mark. In addition to that, we've had a pretty steady, if not spectacular, increase in indebtedness. It's gone from 11.1 billion in 2022 to projected 15.6 for this year coming up, and that marks a $4.5 billion increase, and which also equates to roughly $2 million a day in interest. So that's the general context in which this 7.9% comes to us. However, for some parts of Auckland, some wards, it's even far more marked than that. So just a couple of months ago in the Albany ward, for instance, and there are other wards too, not just the ward I represent, the average rate increase was, for both local boards, was over 10%. But perhaps more disturbing than that was the breakdown of the figures of the people whose increases were actually between 10 and 20%. So in the Hibiscus and Bays, that represented 45% of people. 45% of people were paying between 10 and 20%, many of them closer to 20 than to 10.
In Upper Harbour, it was even higher. 47% of people were paying between 10 and 20%. So for those people, that represented an astronomical increase. So that the 5.8 didn't bear much relation to reality as far as they are concerned. It was in the context of the revaluation that occurred. But it was also in the context of that wider concern which the government has picked up on, and hadn't been all that convincing the way they've dealt with it, but they've picked up on that concern with our residents. And it's not just them. We had the Auditor General just this year talking about the question of financial sustainability and talking about long-term plans. They said councils are increasing rates at historically high levels to pay for much needed investment in infrastructure. Councils are also increasing their debt to some of the highest levels in decades. These factors create risk to councils' long-term financial sustainability. So that's not me, it's not the government, that's the Auditor General saying that. And I guess that financial sustainability, when you translate it and give it a human face, it's even a lot more stark. So just a couple of months ago, I was dealing with a deluge of people from all walks of life, superannuitants whose rates had gone up essentially, $1,000, young couples on fixed incomes who had budgeted 7% for the rate increase, but their rate increase had been 18%, and so forth and so on. So the human face of it was really stark. And here we are at this stage, with a relatively unrepresentative salary-wise cross-section of the Auckland community, looking at nearly 8%, 7.9%. So I don't know what I'm really expected to do. Go back to those people who had half of them between 10 and 20%. Oh, well, just tough it out. This might be the last one. It might not. We're selling off our assets. They're going. We're looking to ramp up that. And your rates this time round is going to be another 7.9%. Well, that's not going to be very palatable. And I would have thought that, at least in the mayoral proposal, there might have been some recognition of the human face of year-on-year rate increases. We had the reference to it being a little higher than it would have liked. Well, actually, for those people, it's a little bit more consequential than that. So, yes, we have to go out and consult. I'm hoping people wake up a bit and we have a lot more people feeding back than the 29% who could be bothered to vote, because when it comes to it, they're the ones who are having to come up with this money, and in many cases, money that has increased on average over $1,000 over the last term of council.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Just a reminder, when the bell goes, that doesn't indicate a minute to go, that's 5 minutes, just to be clear. But, Councillor Winiata.
Yes, thank you. I understand that $5.2 million was the utilities cost increase for local boards. Considering that was going towards energy, if energy continues to go up in price the way that it has been, the CRL we're in for a bit of hurt with, being electric lines. I wonder if when we start over the years hitting that increase, one, if it's been budgeted for, and two, if we start looking to make to find cost cuts for the CRL, if we start letting go of staff at Auckland Council who are in fact using the CRL to get into the city and things like that. So if we're shooting ourselves in the foot with that. But with respect to advice that goes to local boards, I was the chair of the Manarewa Local Board, and we were advised that it was just a one-off cost pressure increase, and I appreciate what the Deputy Mayor said, that it's not, and that this is for the LTP. I would implore Council to advise local boards very clearly what they're up against, because if they're being asked to go through a land optimisation plan and look to sell off assets that aren't of any use to anyone, they need to appreciate that the funding from that optimisation program is going to be essentially potentially set for paying for these increases over time, so that they are going to have to be finding the money from somewhere, and that this is their opportunity to get ahead of the game with respect to not having to be penalised in future years. So if that information could be clearly set out to the local boards, because I don't believe that they are actually considering that as seriously as this presents that they should be.
Thank you, Councillor. David? No? Okay. Councillor Patterson-Hamlin.
Kia ora, and apologies for the many syllables in my last name. I acknowledge what other councillors have said, and particularly Councillor Watson's point that we don't represent the financial or home ownership reality of Auckland around this table. We just don't. So I'd like to give a different human face and some numbers and context for the increases that we're talking about in support of this proposal. Auckland has the lowest rate of home ownership in the country, and of those lucky enough to own their own homes, many have mortgages to the tune of $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a fortnight, an additional $4.50 a week, which is the average amount it would be with a 7.9 increase on the rates bill of people like myself, is not going to be what compounds the cost of living crisis. It's pales in comparison to how much supermarket bills have gone up, for example. The impact of increased fees and charges will have a similar impact in a more direct way, realistically, to the majority of Aucklanders. And that's not to say that we take rates increases lightly at all. You know, I understand that there are those who own their own homes mortgage-free who are retired, no longer earning, and that's why the rebate scheme is important. But I think it is worth remembering the experiences and the realities of Aucklanders who rent or have large mortgages, because that is the majority of Auckland. So I'm in support of this mayoral proposal. Kia ora.
All right, thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to second the mayoral proposal key points that will be turned into a consultation document early in the new year, which we will check. I don't particularly like a 7.9% average rates rise, but it should come as no surprise to anyone who was part of Auckland Council last term. It was in the LTP and it was signalled, and I think an important part of the consultation document is to explain that rates rise and why it is the number it is when we come to the consultation document. The average value residential property will go up as a result of that rates rise, about $320 more. Still a lot of money, but it's $320 more. I also, though, if we're going to go to Auckland and ask that, we have to prove to Aucklanders that we're doing everything we can to minimise that. And that's around looking at new revenue sources, getting more from that which we own, and I reference the Auckland Future Fund, the ports, and of course savings. The savings target for this plan will be the second highest we have ever had, only outstripped by the emergency budget when, as you all know, we pretty much lost everything overnight by way of income. So we are going to do our part to balance this. People, you don't have to agree with everything in this, but what we're asking you to do is to agree to go out to consultation and ask the people of Auckland what they think. The detail around that, by way of, as I said, the consultation material will be fine-tuned over the summer, and you'll have a chance to have a look at that and tweak that yourselves come early February. So I'm very happy, Your Worship, to second your key points in this plan, and I urge you all to do the same. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Nguyen.
I mean, I wasn't going to say anything, Chair, but I mean, I do. It is not an unreasonable thing to point out the non-negotiable cost component of the rate increase around the operating cost of the City Rail link. And I didn't, you know, I wasn't on, I'm not sound like Pontius Pilate here, but I wasn't on the council at the time when that agreement was reached. but I certainly would not have been an enthusiastic supporter for the terms by which it was. Because it's an operating cost for this council, which is very expensive. So I think it is fair to point out that I don't think anybody around here wants to, in their heart of hearts and in practical terms, impose a 7.9% rate increase. The balance of the increase beyond the non-negotiable City Rail Link operating cost is still significant, but it is comparatively modest. I think that the savings will need to continue to be found, but I don't think that it is. I think that we're all aware of how this is impacting on, or certainly I'm aware of how this is impacting on my constituents when I knock on their doors and they tell me about the cost of council. The only thing that I would say to the Mayor and going back to government, as I know that he's consistently doing, is to reflect to the Minister of Local Government that the increase in the cost that Auckland is imposing on our ratepayers is primarily due to the impact of a negotiation directed by central government. And that every time we then get told, well, we're not actually finding the savings and there's waste and all that, narrative, well, explain the savings in real terms, Minister, that aren't going to hurt your constituents, because actually the savings that we do need to come up with will hurt your constituents, and you haven't told us if that's acceptable yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I wasn't going to speak either, but I thought someone had to talk about transport reform. It is the biggest change to the governance structure of the city since 2010. And first, before I just begin with that, I'll just thank the Mayor and his staff for development of this proposal, which I'm happy to support. Look, I'm delighted to see the reforming that we're doing in the transport space, and just welcome the public's view on how they see it best, how they wish to best govern that, because I think we're doing a really great thing here. We're making the transport system more democratic. We're allowing communities to have more of a say in how they get around their own city. And I do add that we're putting this list out to consultation on what a public transport CCO would do. I think we've kind of nailed the list. And that's a huge achievement in and of itself, because it's relied on a lot of staff work with AT as well, to get to a place where I think we're probably about 90% comfortable, and we just need to look at the edge cases. So that's exciting as well. I'm very thankful to be in a position to help develop that too. So apart from the huge change, the other most notable thing I think about this proposal is that we're not having to find huge amounts of money to fill fiscal gaps. And there's been previous budgets where we've had to look for hundreds of millions, and having lists in front of us of services that may be cut, and the heartbreaking implications of that for communities and for staff. We're not doing any of that. And in fact, while the rate increase will be felt, it's also it's reasonable when you look at the CRL component of it. And we strip out that non-negotiable sort of lock-in proposal, we'd be on an absolutely standard track, which is what the LTP sets out as well. So I think there's great fiscal responsibility there. I just really appreciate the work and looking forward to making good changes through the annual plan process before looking ahead to the LTP. Now, I'm between you and lunch, so I had a list of the myriad of policy changes I'd like to see us to go further on, things like lowering the public transport weekly fare cap, things like resourcing homelessness more, things like building pools, but I won't talk about that today. I might save that for the LTP. I just end by saying this is a consultation, and I just urge colleagues to treat that with a positive spirit, to continue to be champions of the city and to seek the positive vision from their constituents and the community on how we improve the lives of Aucklanders. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Hills, you might be final.
Cool, thank you, Chair. And yeah, just want to say that it does feel, even though the higher rates are a massive sting to many, it does feel like we're getting on track without having surprises, which the last 5 or 6 years, on track, yeah, the last 5 or 6 years have meant surprises through COVID, through massive inflation, through storms, and everything has been a rush trying to figure out what we're doing, trying to explain to the public what has to be cut and what has to come up. The rate increase is how we fund capital. I mean, that is when a project opens or finishes, that comes on our debt, and suddenly we have to fund the depreciation, we have to fund the interest straight away. That's just how we fund our debt. Yes, our debt is increasing, but it's reducing as a component of our assets. But no one has come up with, as far as I know, a new way to fund new capital. As I always ask Ross and others, that what is the rates rise if we funded it through cash? It's something like 50 or 60% increase to the rates if we funded our CapEx through cash. If we don't fund it through cash, then we don't do it. And we kind of, at this point, don't have a choice not to do the CRL. It's almost finished. I remember the conversations when we added the budgets to it. As Councillor Newman said, we weren't here when it happened, but you're faced with the decision to add $500 million or leave it as a half-dug hole in the ground that businesses and people have to walk around for the rest of our lives until a council comes up with the money, and we would have lifted 50-50 funding from government. So I know there were people who voted against that, increasing those budgets, whether it was last term or the term before. But as a collective, we have to figure out a majority that will fund the hard things. Everyone has a democratic right to vote for a budget and vote against the rates rise. But if 11 of us do that, we have no budget. So I hope that through this conversation, we can have good conversations with our communities about the need and the fact that if we don't want a 7.9% rates increase, we have to dramatically cut other things, and no one is putting forward the hundreds of millions that we'd need to do, as far as I know, to bring that down. And so we must open the City Rail Link. It would be pretty ridiculous if we don't. So we have to fund the interest and the depreciation and the running of it. Transport reform, I think, will be a massive change for Auckland, but it's not going to be easy. We are all going to have to do a lot of work in that space, and I am excited, as Councillor Henderson, about it, to get our understanding around that and show Aucklanders we are actually responsible for the decisions that are made on our transport network and our public transport. And it won't be easy or nice for many of us, I'm sure, because there's going to be constant pressure on us to make more decisions with less money, or more decisions, and us, Aucklanders, how we're going to fund that. But I will say on a rates cap, last year, if you were a part of a household with the average wage and the average wage went up, the average, you paid an extra $1,600 in PAYE to the government. If you're an average household with the average rates, you paid an extra $233. So the government is not having to consult on their budget, but we go out to the public, and so far every time the public has said, yes, we're happy to pay this rates rise, maybe not happy, but we will give feedback that we want this rates rise because we don't want dramatic cuts to services. The government doesn't have to do that, yet they took an extra $1,600 from the average household, where we billed an extra $233. So it is difficult, but we need more tools to fund things, and unfortunately that is all up to legislation, as we know as well. So we're stuck in this cycle of trying to do more with the same funding tools. So it's up to all of us to have that conversation with our communities and try and get them to understand the pressures we're under, which are pressures they're under too. So, kia ora.
Good, thank you, Councillor. That brings us to the conclusion of those who want to speak to the item. On that note, I'll put the item on voices. Yep, okay. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against?
Just record against B.
Recording against, same as
A and B.
A and B, Councillor Watson? Okay. Okay, all right.
And Chair, the abstention on A, because of the assumptions behind it that I foreshadowed earlier, please.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Have we got that, team? Okay, very good. Okay, declare the motion carried. On that note, we'll break for lunch. We'll come back at 2, is it 2 o'clock? Yeah? No, 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock. Let's kick off on the hour. Okay, thank you. The meeting is adjourned to 2 o'clock.